You are host now, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all. Let us start. Hang on, let me bring in my PPT. Okay, so we are talking about politics of migration governance today. Now, there's a very interesting thing that what we saw last time is the fact that migration is always seems to be good for both the host nation as well as the home nation. The host nation benefits in terms of economics. The home nation benefits in terms of remittances and again the economics. And yet we are seeing the world over uh, talk about migrants. There is some sort of a disquiet. People are concerned about migration and so on and so forth. There are various issues to it, and this is what comes under politics. So, inevitably, the governance part of migration and the politics behind it. And more often than not, migration has been seen or it continues to be seen in a particular way. And more often than not, we are seeing, especially, for example, in the Western nations, even in India, we are seeing that migration is being seen from a security lens. But there are more aspects to migration than just the security lens. So let's look at it. So let's look at the objectives. We look at what is migration governance, different instruments of migration regime, analyze impacts of politics, and we will also understand why this politics comes about. Remember, inevitably, we have seen over multiple units how a lot of politicians across the world dwell in identity politics, and inevitably, as soon as identity politics come in, then it's always us versus them, and inevitably, the migrants are them. And we also look at the challenges posed in migration governance. So, migration, most critical non-traditional security challenge for the Westphalia nation states. In fact, the concept of Westphalia nations, the concept of nation states, especially the sovereignty of nation states, was the Westphalia Declaration of the 17th century, 1600 something. You can Google it and find out. So, and again, this is a very interesting thing. We have seen, the world has seen, and humanity has seen, for example, that two world wars led to nothing. In fact, World War II was the result of, the consequences of World War One. After millions of people died, everybody thought that now there will be cooperation because people will understand that wars do not or conflicts do not lead to a solution. And yet, inevitably, we are seeing the world, there are multiple conflicts happening simultaneously. Yeah, in fact, after World War II, the importance of human rights over violence, we talked about relevance of sustainable development. We are seeing how climate change is being affected, and why sustainable development is important. And yet we see there is this conflict. We are seeing exploitative development. So, mixed experience of cooperation and conflict as human population. As human population increase, there is renewed aspiration. Inevitably, we have also seen that human beings work towards aspirations. Also, there is a perceived deprivation versus actual deprivation. Politics is what works on perception. In this context, the politics of migration plays a crucial role in managing the migration process associated. And inevitably, human beings have also realized and states have also realized that migration is historically there and will continue. And yet, the politics comes center stage. So, in terms of IOM, migration governments may be defined as combined framework of legal norms, laws and regulations, policies and tradition. organizational structure, relevant processes. So governance is a complicated structure. It's not a political rhetoric. It is more in terms of how laws, how legal norms, how policies, traditions, organization structures, and processes become very important that shape and regulate states' approach with regard to migration in all its forms. Inevitably, if you see, and if it is historically known that people are migrating, they could be migrating within a country's border, they could be migrating across a border. One might question, why are states still not prepared for this migration? We saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lockdown announced. There were these major migrants moving across states. Is Does the state not realize of the numbers of people who are migrating or who have migrated in terms of job or better life within a country, and similarly between countries? So nevertheless, this is how it works, because it's a complicated issue. It's not a straightforward issue. It considers to incorporate in terms of travel and temporary. And when people migrate, especially with respect to borders, they transit through other countries. They could go from one country to another direct country, or they could go from one country transiting through other countries. So travel and temporary mobility, there is an immigration and immigration. There are concepts of nationality. There are concepts of labor market, economic and social development, industry, social cohesion, social service here. Because inevitably, again, when migration happens, there are clash of cultures. How do those cultures get resolved? The minority majority complex, how do they get resolved? Inevitably, then there are security challenges, there are understanding challenges. Remember, these are multiple cultures trying to work together, and that brings in certain amount of politics in it. Politicization of migration has been increasing over the years. It has been observed with the formulation and implementation of immigration policies, border controls. And this is something which is happening across the world. So let's look at a conceptual overview. Ideas to understand politics of also includes a deeper understanding of global. And more often than not, one needs to understand the global north and south, representing developed countries and developing countries, migrant origin countries, transit countries, receive. So, why are the Western countries, typically the developed countries, having so much of discussion about migration, when during colonization, all these countries that came and took the raw materials from the global south and got them developed. So inevitably, then there is this politics involved in terms of the global north and global south. And we will also see that in the absence of what is called a world government, the various laws are made which favor the global north over the global south. The politics of needs to be understood through the complex interplay between institutions, political economy, post-colonialism, neo-colonialism, and all those forces that develop social inequality. So inevitably, there's a social inequality. And that social inequality, rather than being bridged, the politics is brought in to let that social inequality remain, and you are trying to control various other factors. So that's what Carmel Lenner et al. Say, is also influenced by structural factors like symbolic power, discursive resources. Discursive resources are how we make sense of the world around us. For example, a lot of, during growing up, even now, a lot of middle class people, understand or believe in the fact that, uh, you know, uh, it's merit over mediocrity. and the concept of freebies, how we understand freebies. So, in one of the units, we were talking about freebies and how do we understand freebies. Is welfareism a freebie? Is giving subsidies to companies, to industries a freebie? How do we understand freebies? How it has been brought out? So this is something called a discursive resource. Our history, the way we have grown, the way we have been taught, the way we have understood, how we make sense of the word. Technologies of government, conduits of memory and violence, inequalities such as race, class, gender, age, sexuality, and disability. In fact, I remember growing up in Delhi, and we still hear the word, there is no influence of, for example, caste in this country, or there is no influence of caste. We are seeing that migrants or people who have migrated to the US or in the Western countries seem to be practicing caste there itself. There have been a lot of stories about caste traveling across borders. So remember, people carry their culture along, whatever they have learned. And the strangest part, one would wonder, is why is the second, third generation in a foreign land, in a foreign culture, using the same concepts what their parents or grandparents did? But that is how culture moves. There is nothing right or wrong. And remember, I always keep telling you in this class, in scholarly and academic pursuits, there is nothing about right and wrong, good or bad. This is how it is. And again, this is how it is based on which scholar is presenting which view. These are viewpoints. So it's very important to understand which scholar, because multiple scholars can have multiple viewpoints. As international migration intersects with now with globalization, with interconnectivity, there are transnational issues, which includes development, trade security, environment change, conflict resolution, disaster risk, human rights, humanitarian action. Everything seems to have got connected with each other. We are no longer independent entities. We are all connected. Therefore, a multilateral approach is needed where all the countries can come together to devise a sustainable migration policy for common welfare of humanity. So let me move out of diaspora and migration and give you an example of intersectionality in terms of digital, how things are changing vis-a-vis digital. This might be an information to you, or somebody, or most of you might already know there is a current scam which is going on, which involves you getting a call from somebody who claims to be from the police or from a police station. A lot of these calls come on WhatsApp, where there is this idea of a picture and there is a person in a police uniform, and the caller says that your son or your daughter, so inevitably, all this data is out in the open. Your son or your daughter has been arrested or has been abducted or is in the jail. And if you do not give this much amount of money, then we will eliminate your child. Now, if think about the fact that if you receive, or your parents receive, or if you are a parent, if you receive such a call, how does this work? And more often than not, you are in a state of panic. I have a neighbor who lost 50,000 rupees because there was a grandson involved. He immediately got money transferred. All issues now are connected. The digitization has connected. Now, where these calls are originating, who is the scammer, how there is an anonymity. So today, these transnational issues also come and intersect with migration. So you need a multilateral approach uh, uh, where all countries need to come together. Now, again, each country would have its own set of politics. How does it work? How do they interact with each other? Migrants or refugees engage with multiple countries, home, transit, and destination countries, essential to have some sort of a global mechanism to govern the principle of migration. And we have seen that irrespective of the fact, something which seems to be right or just does not seem to be working, because of various politics, of various differences between, let's say, the global north or global south. We have seen that in the Ukraine-Russian war, the Western media talked about Russia as the aggressor, whereas in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it is the Palestinians who are at fault. How does this work? So inevitably, there are different prisms through which various things are seen. There needs to be a rule-based governance to manage and resolve migration issues effectively. And because migration is a multi-country, issue, it needs multiple, countries to come together to resolve. Nation takes care of their policies in their respective countries at domestic level. International level, it becomes quite challenging to become consensus over issues due to absence of any world government. We have seen another example where, between Pakistan and Afghanistan, when there was a change of government in Afghanistan, there were a lot of Afghanis refugees which came over to Pakistan, and then the Pakistan state wanted them to leave. How does this work in the international thing, considering the fact that Afghanistan is still under tumult? How does this work? Obviously, at the local political level, Pakistan being a developing country, resources are stretched. Where how do they take care of refugees? Same thing happened with the Rohingyas in Bangladesh and India. How do you take care of that? Has to be so global migration governance has to be multi-layered, multi-level, scope and reach at national, regional, and global levels. uh, Imperative for sovereign states to consider all relevant. And now there are not only state actors, there are non-state actors. So NGOs are non-state actors, things like World Bank, IMA, or global NGOs are non-state actors. Bill Gates Foundation is a non-state actor who's talking about various things. How do you interact with such non-state actors? So IOM's migration government's three principles. The principles are human, it has to be orderly, it has to be well managed, and migration policy for states. And the framework involves these principles of adherence to international standards and fulfillment. And we have seen that in the human rights scenario, over time, we have looked at the fact status of migrants, regardless of nationality, as per international law, rights to safety, physical integrity, well-being, and dignity must be preserved. Related to family unification work, residency, and citizen are also mentioned. We have also seen examples in earlier units about how in the US itself, they had, segregated the parents and children, which was absolutely against all international laws. It was against all human rights. It was human rights violation. But the American state did that. Evidence and whole of government approach to migration governments, related institutions, legal and regulatory framework is proposed through analysis of transparency, take account of all ministries. So, and whenever you make a policy, it has to include multiple stakeholders. So, for example, if a state makes a policy, are the various ministries of the state understanding? So, how, because when a person migrates, it's not just a person. You have to look at the economics of it. Does the person get a job? Does the person, where will they stay? How will they eat? How will they interact? Etc. etc. Strong partnerships to support migration governments, efforts to cooperation on migration related issue with other states, non-state actors, private sector has become an important non-state actors now with multinationals. These are non-state actors. Socioeconomic well-being of the migrants in society, because inevitably whenever these things are talked about or these international policies are framed, they looked at the fact that inevitably the story is of the human beings, because the story is being told by the human beings for the human beings. And if human beings cannot work at their well-being, then what story are we talking, and how are we looking at human beings at the top of the food chain? promote stability, education, and employment. And inevitably, if there's a migration, there is a family, there are children, education, employment. Therefore, policies need to be designed to foster strong socioeconomic outcomes for migrants. Mobility dimensions, types of preparedness by state during environmental disasters, and we are seeing more and more climate-related migration happening. Then conflicts. What happens if a conflict happens? For example, the Rohingya conflict or the Palestinian conflict or the Ukrainian conflict, when migrants are moving, in which they did not choose to move. Long-term approaches toward recovery, transition, and sustainable developments are needed. Then, of course, there is the safe, orderly, and dignified pathways, because inevitably, if states are going to prevent safe, orderly, or dignified pathways, then migrants will use illegal pathways. And if they use illegal pathways, there is a chance of smuggling, there's a chance of trafficking, there's a chance of death and destruction. What we saw, for example, in the Gujarati couple who froze to death between the Canada-US border, towards migration, in terms of border control, enforcement policy, criteria for admission, resilience in preparing, trafficking, smuggling, etc. To implement this, would work with national and international justice and security agencies to collect, analyze, and then there needs to be a data. In the absence of data, how do you know? So more often than not, when the US politician says there are major migrations happening, what is the data? Who's presenting the data? Who's collecting the data? What kind of migration is happening? What kind of labor do they require? So that data is very important. So then there is something called a migration governance index. Model framework has completely comprehensively described five important policy. So the policies are institutional capacity, institutional framework, strategy, legal framework, transparency and coherence, data gathering, and information availability. That's the institutional capacity. Then there are migrant rights, access to basic social service, family rights, right to work, long-term residence. You can't just let people come in and allow them to, do whatever. If that starts happening, then the state's role or the state's authority itself would get diluted. So control becomes a very important aspect of the state. Remember, when we were talking about transnationalism, one of the perspective was that the state is losing control now. There are transnational movements happening. People are having direct control. But the fact is, state has a control in terms of issuing passports, in terms of issuing visas, in terms of border control. State will always remain, at least in the near future. Safe and orderly migration, border control and enforcement, admission and inevitably, if state is not putting controls out there, then people will find a way. It is something like, if you are going to block people from talking, they will find a way to talk. If you block people from moving, people will find a way to move, because that is the history of human beings. Reintegration policies. What about people wanting to move back or reintegrating with their families, measure to combat human trafficking, and in all these, to combat human trafficking and smuggling. Then there is the labor migration management. What are the skills required? What are the qualifications, recognition schemes, student migration regulation, bilateral labor? So we have seen that in the Ukraine-Russian conflict, suddenly everybody in India realized that there were 40,000 students studying in Ukraine. Now think about from various aspects. If you look at from an economic aspect, all this money which could have been spent by the Indian students in Indian institutions and in the Indian economy now was going into some other country's economy. Number one. Number two, what happens when these students graduate? Will they come back? Obviously, because they are Indians, they will have to come back. But in between, this conflict came about. Now the Indian government went about rescuing these people. At that moment, it appeared that there was a lack of data. or a lack of, some governance mechanism as to what would happen. Now, what is happening to the students? Are they back? What happens when a student goes out and there is, you need to plan that also, for example, because at the end of the day, it's the state's responsibility and they are the citizens. Similarly, each state across the world needs to look at the fact that if people are migrating, what happens if this migrants meet with, some eventuality? How does the state respond? What will happen? Regional and international cooperation and other partnerships, signature and ratification of international convention, regional cooperation, bilateral agreements, global, and at any moment of time, there are multiple, conventions or corporations that need to be figuring it out. With that data, the government is able to figure out where migration is happening. For example, today, a large number of students from India are studying in the Gulf region, in UAE. How many of them are studying? What are they studying? What is happening on that money which is going out? uh, all these things needs to be, first codified and then planned. So a migration regime can simply be defined as a national, regional, and international effort to codify and manage migration. Because inevitably, if you there is an old saying about management: if you can't measure, you cannot manage. And that measurement is codifying and collecting that data. And in the absence of codifying, how do you manage? Then there are these instruments of migration regime. There is a 1951 Refugee Convention. It's a multilateral treaty ratified by 145 states. People living outside their home countries are unable or willing to, because of well-founded fear of persecution, they are defined as refugees. Who is to be defined as refugees? How are you supposed to give asylum? What happens when you give asylum? Is there a case where a person can acquire citizenship based on naturalization? How long does it take for naturalization? What is the process? Prescribe the definition of refugees, right of displaced, and legal obligation of states to protect them. Some of the principles of are as follows: non-discrimination, non-penalization, non-refoulement. Should not be forced to return. For example, Britain was coming out with this policy of moving refugees to Rwanda. Now, that seems to go against the 51 Refugee Convention. And yet, there was this politics about sending these peoples to Rwanda. It was struck down by their courts. And so there is a certain amount of politics which comes into migration policies. Then there is something called an ILO Migration for Employment Convention. There is a convention concerning migration and abusive conditions and promotion of equality in opportunity and treatment of migration workers. Now, these instruments are there over a period of time, signed by various states, by various governments, again, with a larger understanding of the story of human beings and the concept of human rights, irrespective of whether one believes it or not, but more often than not, states look at people as human beings, and each human beings have rights. So all these conventions, work on that. Then there is, sorry, hang on, sorry. Protection of the rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. So inevitably, it is assumed the fact that when there is a migrant, the migrant would have a family. What happens to their families? If the families are not taken care of, then there is a vulnerability. There is an Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. So the larger aspect to look at everything is the human rights aspect. And to add to it, the Palermo Protocol in terms of trafficking, especially women and children. It's a common international definition, because if you are not having an orderly migration, if you are trying to prevent migration, migration will still happen. But then there is this chance of trafficking, there's the chance of smuggling. How do you work at that? There is a Palermo protocol, highlights the problem associated with trafficked persons, which leads to inhuman, degrading, and dangerous exploitation, prevention, investigation, and prosecution. How do you define? And remember, I have been telling you over the units, we need to always start first with a definition. Define, but who also say who's defining? Because each scholar might look at things in a different way. For example, the definition of diaspora over a period of time since Safran brought his first definition of a diaspora has itself changed. And that's the most interesting part and the most frustrating part of academics, because things keep on changing as more people start read it or study it. They come out with different tech. There are instruments in terms of protocol against smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air. 2000 cooperation, exchange of information. There are principles of internal displacement. It's not just the international organizations are looking at displacements across international borders, but even internally displaced people. Different phases of displacement, providing protection against arbitrary displacement, access to protection and assistance during displacement, guarantees during the return or alternative settlement and integration. So, for example, the concept of getting ration card wherever the migrant is, it's one of the ways of accepting that there is internal displacement. And if people are internally being displaced in search of a better job or a better life, then if they are still poor, they should be able to avail the ration, because after all, it's a single country. So it goes in that direction. Sorry. So it has been an attempt to provide protection and assistance to internal displaced people, devise an institutional arrangement to help poor, dispossessed, and vulnerable person. Then there are institutions for that. There is a, United Nations High Commission for Refugees established in 1950. Remember, a lot of these institutions or these arrangement or conventions came after the Second World War, when the world or humanity as a whole realized that as human beings on the top of the food chain, there has to be some ways they need to govern themselves. Do we have any law on prevention of smuggling of migrants? When we say, do we have any law, are you talking about does India have a law or what, Meena? Meenal, in terms of smuggling and trafficking, the Palermo Protocol works. It's an international law which has been, which is a convention and followed by most countries of the world. So you don't need to have an independent law. A lot of times, the local laws in terms of IPC work on specific occasions. And that is why, in fact, it is very difficult sometimes to convict traffickers and smugglers, because the local agencies who are doing the conviction or picking up the criminals are not able to work out under which law to convict. Okay, Meena? So there is a whole UN international law in terms of trafficking and smuggling.
Sir, can I just add to this
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, Devragya. Yes,
Yes,
please,
sir.
please add.
So the thing is, when we are talking about the law as such, there is no law, no
Okay,
international law, but
okay,
then we have the conventions and the protocols which
okay,
become the law.
okay,
And when we are talking about the Palermo Protocol or the others, especially the UNODC is dealing with it, whereas this one, what Meenal is talking about, this is more of, the sea and the trade. And
Yes,
so when
absolutely,
we're talking about the
absolutely.
Indian law, yes, we have specific laws that deal with the trafficking and exploitation of women and children. Not only this, it's under the IPC and other laws in specific to women and children. So we
Uh,
have like a plethora of laws.
what is the law on IPC law on trafficking? Is there a specific Indian law on trafficking? Dev
There is this trafficking and exploitation of women and children. There is an act.
Okay.
There is an act. I will just write
Praful's
on the thing.
370 IPC. Is it 370 IPC? Praful, are
Yes,
you
this will be under the penal code.
that will be under the
Yes.
penal code? Okay.
Yes. So we
I
have a
think,
lot
sir,
of laws.
Meenal, that is the United Nations Office of Drug Control. Uh, it looks at smuggling and trafficking. They are the ones who bring out report. This UNTOC is talking about trade and
Yeah, because the protocols are add-ons to what they are doing actually. That is
uh,
there. But when we talk about a proper law, there is a difference between a convention and a protocol.
correct,
That is,
absolutely. Based on the convention and the protocol, laws are made. Independent, each country makes their own law. Trafficking and smuggling might work under a different law. 370, what I want to know is about Indian law on smuggling. Is there a law on
sir, sir, I would,
smuggling?
sir, I would just like to add, sir,
Yeah,
there is Article 23 in the Constitution which says that prohibition of traffic in human beings and forced labor,
okay,
and it is available to non-citizens as well.
okay.
So I think that would work.
So, Meenal, that is what is work. Is there a specific IPC law on smuggling of people? I'm not sure about that.
yes, sir, it's 370. That is what I'm saying.
370 only. Okay.
India, there is a plethora of laws where we can go because the law is actually, bent towards saving the women and the children. Our
Okay.
Indian law. That is
Okay.
what I am trying to say.
Okay. Perfect. Meenal, you can just Google more and maybe share it next time in the class or share it on your group so that other people are also able to get it. Meenal? Okay.
Sir, I would just like to say that
Ha.
there is a specific act also, the Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act
Yes.
1956.
The Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act, that is also there. And that act, under that act, people can be convicted for smuggling also.
Yes, sir. It's, yeah, the whole thing. I mean, you can see a lot of segments in a lot of laws in our country.
Perfect. Meenal, thanks, Praful. Thanks, Devpragya, for all your inputs. So, under institutions, there is the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Uh, 1951 Convention on Refugees, assists governments and other organizations with dealing with human trafficking and overcoming migration management challenges, takes account of mixed migration, mixed movements, which are highly complex. And so there is a migration portal with mixed migration. What is mixed migration? Add me to the group. Isn't Jyoti a part of your WhatsApp group, guys? If she is not, kindly please add. Jyoti, get in touch with one of the participants in this group. Whoever can connect with Jyoti and add her to the group, or Jyoti, you can get in touch with Dr. Sada and get yourself added to the group. Sada sir is administration. So Jyoti, please get in touch with Sada sir. He will add you to the group in case you are not a part of this group. Then there is a United Nations Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, coordinates humanitarian partners. See, the thing about UN also, we need to understand the fact that irrespective of various conventions or various things that they talk about, member countries have to then follow suit. If any member country there or decides in terms of their local domestic politics to either not follow or not take account of all that, then the UN can only bring in pressure but can't do beyond. So if you see recently in terms of South Africa taking Israel to the International Court of Justice, even after the Court of Justice had adverse, remarks to say against Israel and talking about stopping the war, Israel has not done anything. Then there is this migration in sustainable development agenda. Hang on, who's So there is this migration in sustainable development agenda, adopted 17 sustainable development goals in 15. Goal 10 to reduce inequality with and among countries. Goal 10.7 asserts to facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility of people. So this is a part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So more often than not, when international community gets together under the auspices of UN, they talk about the larger goals of humanity. But it so happens that when it comes to the individual countries level and their countries' politics, then somewhere these goals tend to get diluted. Though definitely countries seem to be, looking at that. Then there is an emergence of regional instruments. Sorry, hang on. There is an African Union Conventions for Protection and Assistance of Internally Displaced People in Africa, which is known as the Kampala Convention, regional mechanisms. So those regional mechanisms also makes a lot of sense, impacts of politics on immigration and immigration. Obviously, there's a power of asymmetry in international politics where powerful states dictate terms and increase the cost for weaker states to comply with this. For example, there was this big discussion between the global north and global south with respect to reducing carbon emissions, where countries like India, Brazil, and China, I think also were talking about why should all countries reduce their carbon emissions considering the fact the Western countries have a way higher carbon emissions and they've been doing it for a way longer period. While when they are trying to force the global south to do the same, they are trying to reduce their development processes. So all these negotiations and these discussions are happening. Has aptly described the inherent dynamics at play by arguing that in the absence of a binding institutional framework, receiving states have discretion to open or close their borders. Implicit rule makers, while standing states, have generally accept the decision of receiving. So why is that when the US wants labor, it opens its immigration and then it closes it? If there is an immigration, there should be a policy. It should be a transparent policy. It should be a uniform policy. Does not seem to work. So obviously there is an inherent dynamics at play at the global level. Context of migration having no specific global law favors the global north. They can exercise their own discretion. Issue of migration is a matter of debate worldwide. Touches not only politics but also economics, demographic, national security, culture, language, and religion. For example, we have seen among Indian states there is this major debate which is happening, often leading to violence. Maharashtra has seen a lot of violence with respect to outsiders, and there are other states holding fort because more often than not there's a clash of demographics, culture, language, and so on and so forth. As per ILO, each member for which convention in force undertakes takes all step against misleading propaganda relating to immigration and immigration. And yet a lot of national elections across the world are being fought on immigration and immigration, more so on immigration. Despite the availability of some international law, all immigrant workers face the same set of issues like relegation to low-paid job, low status, denial of labor right, political disenfranchisement, state repression, racism, bigotry, and nativism. We've seen that across the world. State controls over immigration law, labor, and denial of civil, political are intended not to prevent but to control. And that is where state, for all the transnationalism, still holds major power. The global working class thus becomes divided between citizens and immigrant labor. creation of the existing category replaces earlier direct colonial and racial caste controls over. So initially there was this colonial control, who works where does the material flow. Now it is this distinct categories of immigrant labor. But there are challenges to migration governance, perceived erosion of national sovereignty. So transnationalism again shows a perceived erosion of the state, long-standing confrontation between national sovereignty and international cooperation, negative public perception migration has remained a widely debated issues. Public considers immigration as a grave threat due to perception created by media and politicians. With various, again, remember, it is politics of identity which gets played out. Lack of international cooperation. Strangely, with globalization and interconnectedness, we seem to see a set of cooperation, at the same time, a set of lack of cooperation, because everybody wants to, say that we are sovereign, we don't want to cooperate. Set of challenges regarding migration. Differences also arise in terms of real or perceived threats. More often than not, remember, there is a perception which is created: overall security, wage differential. For example, in the Western countries, there is this perception which is created that immigrants will take your job and etc. And we have seen out of various stories that immigrants actually add to their GDP. Quite challenging to bring consensus among countries, global migration policies. Then there is the institutional apathy. Already strong institutions at global for enabling smooth flow of goods and capital, but not in case of human migration because of some amount of politics which come into the picture. Few institutions that are solely focused on this aspect related to migration. Indication that many states are not considering migration as a priority. Again, priority area. Are we looking at a priority area? Assuming the fact that if so many Indian students are going out to study, are we giving it enough focus? Is there politics around that? We don't see that. So, for example, when there was this talk that migrants during COVID in the Gulf were not paid their wages. So, unless the Indian state would look at migration or migrants as a priority area, a political area, they would not push for, with other states in terms of treaties or in terms of diplomacy to get their dues. So there are some references: global governance of migration. There's a migration governance framework. So obviously there are a lot of challenges. There are a lot of issues. It's not as simple as saying that, oh, let's look at human rights. Let's look at migration, orderly flow. There are other challenges and so on and so forth. Let me stop sharing. And hi. Oh, Swadesh is here. Swadesh, the same thing that we were talking about, the migrant workers in the Gulf didn't get their wages during COVID because inevitably, is it a political focused area? Is the Indian state pushing on the Gulf or various, non-state actors out there? So there are multiple issues in terms of migrant governance. Any question, guys?
Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, Shrestha.
I wanted to ask one thing. Um, has the Indian government presently or in the last few years, I'm not aware of this, has the government initiated any particular specific program for the skill development of the labor or the non-resident Indian population overseas, matlab for any purpose, like for instance in Central Asia, the labor that matlab, there is so much of a good percentage of Indian workers going there. So has the government taken any steps to kind of for their skill development or even their after repatriation, any kind of, I think, um, social schemes or such kind? I think I'm aware of the social schemes, but skill development has any steps been taken?
There is a skill development program which is being run, which is advertised a lot. I do not know how it works. Is it for people going outside? Swadesh, is there any skill development for workers going outside? I am not sure. I don't think so. Swadesh? Swadesh is not there. I am not sure, because for that, one has to have an institutional mechanism of finding on what all various skills are, currently in need, how to get people to quickly skill them up for them to avail those opportunities abroad. I'm not really sure if there is an institutional mechanism. Swadesh might know of something because he's involved with this. Does anybody else know of any skill? There is a skill development initiative of the government which is currently running, but that's more in terms of internal skill development. I don't know whether it's for outside. For example, ITIs are a skill development institute which do skill, but that's for again for local. Does anybody know of any skill development? Any person? Depragya, do you know of any skill development?
So because I was just reading that in the OECD countries,
Huh.
these countries they are looking for specific
Skills.
yes, for, and they are also, they have put certain restrictions also on several sending countries, that the kind of skills that they are looking for. And so I think they, for them, it's like it has become very I think essential for them to kind of filter out the skilled labor.
Hmm.
So in that sense, I was thinking that we might have signed bilateral agreements with these countries, and then so that for, so might be, we might be in, bilateral arrangements with them. So they might, we might not be training
Understand.
our laborer in this, but these countries might be giving those training to us, to our countrymen.
Understand. Shesha, I need to
But
look it up.
can I?
Yeah, Depragya.
So the thing is, she's right, and also it's not with the countries. The MOUs are being signed. It's basically the people, the NRIs. If we take an example of America, the CEOs or whatever, the entrepreneurs, they are being asked to uh, train our people, train the Indian people, so that
Hmm.
when they go out, there is not no problem there when they are looking,
No, so
for
Depragya, what you're saying is that these private companies who are
the
non-resident.
people, yes, the NRIs, the people who are residing abroad, and the ones who have skills. When we talk about IT sector, especially, they are
Okay.
being invited to give lectures and to train people in our country. Yes, I've read about it very
Okay.
well.
No, so again, there is no institutional mechanism. This is more in terms of case basis or in terms of, non-state actors. As a
Yes.
state institutional mechanism, I am not sure, at least I am not aware. I can read up and find out. Today, Shrestha, also you need to understand in terms of a lot of labor recruitment, there are these third-party recruiters. A lot of recruitment does not happen state to state. It is through recruiters. So, for example, if there is a company, let's say Qatar was having hosting the World Cup, and Qatar wanted labor force, they would get some third party recruiters to recruit from, let's say, India and Nepal. Where now these it would be on the third party recruiters to train, to arrange these people, to do their movement, to do whatever. Skill development programs are mostly run by labor departments, Indian government for Indian citizen. Absolutely, Kanga. That there is a whole flagship program on skill development which the current government is bringing out. So a lot of this recruitment is by the third party recruiters. In fact, globally now, there has been a lot of focus on these third party recruiters because they seem to be the fronts for trafficking and smuggling. And these third party recruiters typically, because for the fact that they are non state actors, the state does not say that they have any control. So they are able to shed off their responsibility. Because if the state has the control, then the state has to look at the welfare issues. So it's like the third party data brokers who collect all this data. Shrestha?
Okay, sir.
But let me, you and me, both of us, in the case of, yeah, absolutely. Mrunal, what happened in terms of Indians and even Nepalis who were taken as porters to Russia are actually fighting the Russian-Ukraine war. Come back to India for short duration to learn some advanced skill and go back. That is, Sanjeev, possibly because of the fact that the Indian learning or the Indian training is way cheaper than the similar training in the US. The US dollar rupee conversion makes it very cheap out here. So see, again, at the end of the day, there is an economics at work. If there was an institutional mechanism to understand this in terms of the fact that, yes, there is this, there is this, thing that we have, considering the fact that based on the US dollar conversion, if we set up such institutional mechanisms where there is a regular training of people coming back, then the state tends to gain out of it. But again, is migration a focus area for the government or the state or what is the politics behind the migration? Is there a politics behind the migration? I don't think so. Considering the fact that Swadesh, when he stood for elections, didn't become an MLA. Considering the fact that where he comes from, there is major migration. People should have voted for him. He's the right MLA for us. So migration still is not it's a political issue in terms of politics. Swadesh, are you there?
You never introduced us to him.
Oh, Swadesh, are you there? Please introduce yourself. Swadesh is not there. He's logged in, but he's not there. Swadesh stood for the Telangana local MLA elections, and he got thousands of votes, but he didn't become an MLA. We were all hoping that he becomes an MLA. Then we can always, kind of say that we know an MLA.
But sir, this was which year?
This year only, the last year Telangana elections.
Okay.
Telangana just went through an election where Swadesh was also one of the candidates in one of the districts, one of the constituencies. I forget the name. So you can connect with Swadesh on WhatsApp. You can figure that out. But I am not sure if migration is high on the politics of the country, because if it was, there were a lot of institutional mechanisms which could have been set up. Regarding skill training, Shrestha, let me read up and see if there is something I can come across. I'll send it to you.
Okay, same here, sir.
Okay, great. Any other question?
Yeah, sir, can I come in? This is
Yeah, Sophia. Yeah, Sophia.
Okay. Sir, this is regarding, you mentioned about the students studying MBBS in Ukraine. And when the war happened, we really had, no idea that this is the sheer volume we had there. Now, my question is, when we travel abroad, the immigration actually records, there is a process where an immigration officer asks, sees the visa, asks us why you going, etc. And the visa clearly mentions the purpose of the visit. So shouldn't the Indian government have had in their records that we have X number of students in Ukraine studying whatever on a student visa, or X number of migrants, laborers, people on work visas or family visas? So why is it that we were caught unawares, is my question.
Sophia,
or are these records not being maintained by the government? Sorry.
No. Sophia, please understand, India is a huge country with a huge diversity, with a huge amount of movement. So that is number one. Number two, you need to understand the way the Indian state functions. So the state is the political, entity, but under the state is a bureaucracy. Now the second part. The third part is the bureaucracy is divided into various ministries, etc., departments, etc., etc. Now, for example, if the immigration is collecting that data, that immigration data is possibly compiled in Ministry of External Affairs. Now, is the Ministry of External Affairs sharing this data with the Labor Department or Education Department or the Niti Aayog? How? Remember, it's not the data which is collected. There is enough data around, but how the data is then compiled, utilized, and acted upon becomes important. More often than not, that is the reason why, besides institution, the processes become important. Besides the processes, what is the vision of the organization or the vision of the state or the vision of the politics? So more often than not, you will find that there. So, for example, when COVID started happening across the world in terms of a pandemic, the immigration did not would have obviously recorded the fact which people were coming from high risk countries and which people were coming from low risk countries. But what they did was they took all the data of people coming in during a specific window and sent it to the municipal committees. And the municipal committees then started visiting each person who had come in and putting posters outside their house. In a situation where people didn't understand COVID very well, it created a huge amount of security issues and other issues because nobody understood COVID, and there was a poster outside people's house which said COVID. Not even the fact that these were immigrants, it almost felt that they were patients. So you have to understand how between data collection, how is the data processed, how it is shared. There are multiple entities. The bureaucracy is a complex animal. So how does it work about becomes important, Sophia. And in the absence of processes, more often than not, then you are caught unaware because things change very fast. Sophia?
Yeah, I understand that, sir. I mean, I think this is more of our bureaucracy related problem because
It's an
I
institutional
remember,
failing. It's an
yeah,
institutional
yeah,
failing. Oh, sorry. Carry on. Carry on.
because I remember, I mean, I worked with an immigration, another country's immigration, and I was really surprised to know that, we were fumbling around when the Ukraine war happened to get our kids back home.
Hmm.
This shouldn't have happened. I mean, look at the US when they issue alerts to their citizens in India, like, I mean, within half a day of stuff happening.
Hmm.
Or I remember a long time ago when we were about to go to war with Pakistan, and that did not happen.
Hmm.
These countries like UK, US, Canada, they immediately alerted their citizens. They said, if you want to go back, contact this number. And the process was in place. Had somebody chosen to go back, they would have been on a flight in another 48 hours. No
Sophia,
questions asked.
absolutely. But Sophia, remember US, UK, A have very few migrants or immigrants in the country, and B, our numbers are huge. Our numbers are huge. Our diversity is huge.
Yeah.
So, we need to remember, I always used to, over the classes, I have been talking about the fact that when we see, policies or bureaucracy and in fact, irrespective of whatever you say, I've come across enough case studies where all these countries start fumbling. Remember, with the kind of resources they have and the numbers, we are talking about phenomenal numbers. Those phenomenal numbers translated into, mechanisms or processes. In fact, sometimes I feel Indians and Indian bureaucracy does exceedingly well with the kind of diversity and numbers that we have. So, should we say that we need to put proper? Brunal, besides the bureaucratic process, there is as we talked about, there is politics to it and focus. What is the focus? Is migration a focused area that Indian state is looking at? What are the various focuses? Because again, remember, there is a paucity of resources when politics is played out. So look at the fact, over so many years, how often has Indian politics focused on education or health? Hardly anything. Why is that? Considering the fact that we all have understood the fact, and in fact, this was a topic of discussion among the Indian middle class that and not only the middle class, today, everybody across the country, whether they come from any socio-economic background or religious background or diversity background, understands the role of education. And yet, education is not a priority political area. How many politicians have you heard talking about education? Or we are doing this in education. So it is not a priority political area. And inevitably, the priority of politics then translates into down in terms of institution and other focus areas. Absolutely. Kangat is talking about COVID vaccine, digital certificate, even US couldn't offer during COVID. So, uh, we with India always understand we have a logistic nightmare in terms of the number of people. And with this kind of diversity and this kind of numbers, sometimes I feel we are doing exceedingly well. It is a miracle to see how the Indian bureaucracy or the Indian institutions manage the kind of numbers that they deal with. You should go to a government hospital or to a government agency to see how they manage. I mean, I am totally in awe. So, but again, the fact is, remember, these are complicated things. It's not as simple as saying this. And of course, at the end, at the bottom of it, there is a politics which come into play. So what is the political focus? If there's a political focus on migration, then possibly the political focus might translate into institutions, in processes, in terms of laws, in terms of the rhetoric, and so on and so forth. Mrunal, again, it has to look at what the government of India's focus is. Is there, if there is a focus on diaspora? So look at the fact that the Indian government started focusing on diaspora, and that's why the OCI cards came in. There are multiple, ways now. If you see, each state has a ministry or a department of foreign affairs. Every state is looking independently at engaging with their diaspora. World over, each people have understood the role of diaspora, the role of migrants. But again, as I said, with India, countries like India and China, see, China had advantage as a single party. It is not a democratic state. India is a democratic state. Now, you cannot again, with a very simplistic assumption, say that, oh, democracy is not good, dictator. That doesn't work. There are multiple aspects of pros and cons of democracy versus a single party system. The point is that India is a democracy. India is a welfare state. India is a huge country with a huge population and a huge diversity. And obviously, things, the way bureaucracy works, it works slowly. And that is where the power of lobbying, the power of politics, you have to push politicians, you have to lobby with the politicians to bring it into a political agenda. And till the time it is not brought into a political agenda, the focus does not come. Okay, guys?
Okay, sir.
Okay, great. So it's already over time. Have a wonderful weekend and have a wonderful weekend. I'll meet you next Saturday before Holi, which is on 25th. And we will talk about the next unit. And hopefully by this month end, we will be able to finish